I'm going to let you compose yourselves and pull yourselves back together whilst I ask a few quick questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. Emma, I'm going to start with you, as you were the start of the project, and go back in time to 2010. You've written this amazing bestseller. Your inbox is bursting with film offers. What made you, or did you always know that you wanted to adapt the book yourself for the screen? And also, what was it about Lenny that made you trust him with this book?
I did want to do it myself, yes, mostly out of fear of the kind of god-awful film that might be made of such a book. Because it's a peculiar storyline, and I could just imagine the kind of sappy TV movie, you know, cute kid movie you could make of it, or the kind of creepy voyeuristic movie you could make of it. So I did a lot of saying no. I felt a bit like an 18th century lady refusing offers. And then an Irishman, Lord knows I was not looking for a fellow Irish person to make this film with, because it's set in America. So I get this 10-page letter from an Irishman, and I'm afraid his eloquence and his burning sincerity and his confidence in how to make a film of this book entirely blew me over.
Okay, so Lenny, for you, you're one of the pleasures of following your film career is how eclectic it is, and each film brings its different textures, but also different challenges. I wonder if we can just start with the spatial challenge of this, and why you were excited by doing something that starts off in such a tiny space.
I think the full extent of that challenge wasn't immediately apparent to me, because I became so caught up in the story of in the experience of reading the novel, which is you get to be inside Jack's head, and so you're transported into whatever he imagines and whatever he wants to talk about. But as I thought more about it, and as we approached it, then yeah, there are some real challenges connected with shooting in such a small space. But I think the thing that both Emma and I agreed on was that I think the thing that I'm very big on generally is that it's always about what's happening, and the idea that you somehow have to add a whole layer of visual decorativeness that you're not going to be able to do, and you're going to be lacking all this fancy sort of stuff, or these wide shots, or these vistas, that actually the story in there is so compelling that it was about having confidence that by just tracking that and being true to those characters, that you would that would be enough for an audience. And in a funny sort of way, I think the constraint of the space is it comes and goes in the experience of watching it, and sometimes we're so involved in the faces and in we're shooting longer lenses and shallow focus, and you can forget about that background. And other times when we want to bring it back, we can show more of it and see the corners, and we can feel that claustrophobia. So in the end, it proved to be the truth was always the same, which is that if you're involved and compelled by what's happening, nothing else really matters.
Okay, well, an absolutely central ingredient to the success of the film is Jacob Tremblay, who plays Jack. Can you talk a little bit about the casting and how you knew that he was going to be the boy?
Yeah, the only thing that, and I never confessed this to Emma, I used to say to him, oh, no, it's absolutely fine. There are ways of finding these children. It will be, don't you worry at all. It'll be, we have it under control. But I would frequently spend, sweaty midnight hours worrying about what would happen if we didn't find our Jack, and in fact worrying that there may not be a boy out there capable of doing this, playing this role at that level, but at the same time feeling young enough to be believable in the part. And so we looked for, we met, talked to, auditioned, put on tape so many boys, and then this extraordinary kid came up out of Vancouver and just has this innate actorly sensibility and this understanding and this big engine in this tiny body, and we were just, I think, extremely privileged to have had a chance to work with him.
Well, Brie, I think Claire mentioned in the introduction, the last time you were at LFF was with Short Term 12, which was another film where you played a character where young people, vulnerable people, had to kind of trust you. I mean, I've just met you and I already trust you. I wonder what your...
you should go jump off this cliff over there. Come with me.
I wonder about your rehearsal period with Jacob and how you built that extraordinary bond that we see on screen.
Well, I guess the key to it really was that he never felt like it was forced, that it was always his choice. And And so Lenny did some very smart ways in creating that environment. So the first time we met was at a pizza parlor, and there was quite a large group of us. And so it was really an easy way for us to first meet. It wasn't this like very intense sort of like meeting at the altar moment of like, oh, I guess this is our life together. It came about in a way that was really easy. And lucked out that I love Star Wars and Ninja Turtles apparently just as much as him, and so we had a lot to talk about at the beginning. And from there, we just kind of got in a bit of a routine. I would come over at night before he went to bed, and we'd play Lego for a couple, like maybe 45 minutes before he went to bed. And he would ask me, for him, like the most deepest, most important questions, like what your favorite animal was and what your favorite color was, and I would answer and feel sort of nervous and wondering if blue was okay or what that meant to him. And he just, you know, his mom would call him to go to bed, and he'd be like, yeah, Mom, I'll be right there. Yeah, Brie, you should come back over again tomorrow. And I'd be like, so excited and surprised and accepted. And I would walk down the hallway just bursting with so much excitement over the fact, oh, I'm going to play Lego with Jacob tomorrow. And I realized that he was not really thinking about me the same way at all. Like, he wasn't nervous being around me. He didn't care if I accepted him or not. He wasn't, you know, laying in bed at night going, oh gosh, you know, I hope Brie doesn't find me a fool because I told her that story about how I covered myself in seaweed and chased my sisters down the beach. He was just... He's so himself and so inhabits who he is, which becomes like an incredible thing to be around all the time, that he doesn't have nervousness in who he is and doesn't have the fear of trying something. And so everything on set became really fun. So things like rolling him up in rug, which I took a video on my phone of the first time we rolled him up, and I'm crying. I'm so moved by what this means and what it is we're doing and what we're rehearsing. And Jacob's laughing hysterically. He just thought it was the most ridiculous thing ever. Rolled up in a rug. Can't wait to tell my friends at school about this. And so it created this incredible dynamic on set where there was this level of the adult world that we were focusing on, that we knew about. We were making sure that there were certain beats that were happening and the universal aspect of this was being told and the reference points were there. But then, no matter what, we had this kid that was giggling over the whole thing and reminding us that it is all rather silly and it doesn't need to be taken so seriously.
He was 7 when we started, and he turned 8. So we did, you know, the instructions that went out into the world with the casting people was that we should look at kids from 5 to about 7 or 8. And we learned really, really quickly that a 5-year-old is just still so much of a baby, and it would just be impossible to really, for the work, you know, with the workload and the amount of concentration and whatever. So we knew that it would be a slightly older kid. So Jake was perfect because he still has that beautiful babyish quality about him. But yeah, I think is he 9 now? He just turned 9, I think. Yeah,
His birthday's October 5th. He just turned 9.
Thank you.
You see, you can do anything at all in a book. There's no rules at all in adult literary fiction. And then you look at the film world and you realize what a peculiar thing you have. But as I say, Lenny was just completely undaunted, you know. At our first meeting, I was like, ooh, what about the long hair? Will we have to get rid of that? And he said, no. And I said, what about the breastfeeding ultimate taboo? He said, no bother. And I said, what about the escape being in the middle? And he said, perfect. So he doesn't make normal films, so that turned out to be a big plus.
Thinking of that, I mean, there's a big part of the success, I think, of the book is that turning point when he understands the outside world, that kind of psychological shift. And, you know, watching the film, you can totally understand why there's not a voiceover, but I have to ask, was it ever in your mind that you might have to employ that to get that shift on the screen?
It's funny, with adapting novels to screen, I think there's a sort of automatic reaching out for the crutch of voiceover, you know. And I in my first draft, I didn't have any voiceover at all because I wanted to see if you could do it by using cinema's tools rather than, you know, narrating bits from the book. And when we'd added voiceover, it was at a fairly late stage. And I remember Lenny saying to me, we're not doing this for information or for explaining or milking the emotion. He said, I wanted to kind of punctuate sequences. And at times I want a voiceover that cuts away from the sentiment, like when Ma takes her overdose, Jack starts commenting about time and space and other things. So I was really excited to use voiceover in that non-obvious way. And in the moments of sort of key emotional action for Jack, I never felt that we needed the little voice telling us what's going on. I mean, there's nothing more cinematic than a child in the moment actually responding to and changing.
And I think also there's a way in which those pieces of voiceover help you to just distance yourself as a filmmaker a little bit from the full-on emotional impact of the scenes, and it helps it from tipping over into melodrama. It's also true to the way children operate, I think, that there's this elliptical type of thought process in kids, and so like Emma said, it didn't feel like we were using it to cheat. It felt like we were using it in a way which added something to the film. And I think the way in which we create this as Jack's story, which was, I think, probably the biggest challenge in the adaptation. This must be his story, and yet you're going to film it. And when you film something, you see, you can't stop but see so much about the world. It's this kind of very promiscuous thing, a shot. It lets all this light in, and so in the novel you can keep away from the grimy details of room for as long as you want, if you want to talk about what Jack is thinking or feeling. But in the film, you're going to be there, and the fear, I suppose, for us was, will it overwhelm the story? When you're sitting there and standing there in the room and seeing it and for what it really is. But in a way, it seems that, I suppose, just the face of that little boy is so compelling that by being with him and looking at him and hearing what's happening in the adult conversation while you're still looking at him, that same distancing from the adult and that inhabiting of the child's world is possible cinematically without sort of resorting to any big tricks.
But I think the film is much more of a two-hander than the book, and that's such a pleasure for me because fans harass me with emails saying, please write it all over again from Ma's point of view. We want to meet Ma directly. We want more about Ma. So I feel like, there you go. Take it away, Brie. Here, meet Ma.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Does anyone else have a question in the audience?
You look for things, for analogies and for things that make sense to a boy of that age, which have a similar emotional shape but are kind of less, that are appropriate. So the overall situation was quite an easy one to describe because kids' fairy tales are all about places, cozy cottages in dangerous forests, and that's what you've got here. You've got a sort of interior world that is safe for the boy, and then you've got this monster who comes and goes, and kids don't ask, well, hang on, where did the Gruffalo come from, and why exactly is he so angry? They accept, he and Jake accepted that this was that's the myth that we're dealing with. In terms of things like the suicide attempt and whatever, I think he was old enough to understand that and to allow it to penetrate as much as he felt comfortable with. It was really interesting that we all saw Jake develop as an actor over the course of making the film. And in that scene where he stands at the top of the stairs and he watches Ma being wheeled away, he cried for real. There were real tears. And this is what's so fascinating, at the end of the take, he was so elated. He was jumping around saying, yes, yes, I did. And it's like he sussed out this amazing thing that he had that actor moment where he goes, I can access this stuff. And isn't that amazing? But he wasn't in the least bit, there was no sort of, I must go to my trailer now and spend, 10 minutes recovering. He was just on to the next thing. It was just a victory for him. It was fascinating.
Well, Room is going to be released in cinemas by Studio Canal, so please do tell your friends and tweet about it. I'm sure we're going to be reading a lot more about it in the season to come. Do enjoy the rest of the festival, and in the meantime, please join me in thanking Lenny Abrahamson, Emma Donoghue, and Brie Larson.